I spent 2 years in Africa between 94 95 teaching economics in Addis Ababa University. During that time, my supervisor was the chief economic advisor to the Ethiopian government. And then he asked me whether I was going to do research in Britain or going to Addis. So I chose to go to Addis. So I spent 2 years Addis Ababa University and Civil Service University. That started my network with Africa. Since then, you believe it or not, I have been visiting Africa more than 35 times something.
Wow.
Even since 2009. Before that, I had about how many years? About 10 years gap of not visiting Africa. And when I visited again in 2009, many Africans asked me, those who were my former friends, and they asked me what has been changed in Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania. Anyway, I didn't visit many countries, but my visit were focused on rather large-scale economies, including Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, DR Congo, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Cameroon, and Rwanda, small.
May I ask just one background issue? I'm curious, what led to your original interest in Ethiopia, other places you might have gone?
Oh, because first of all, we have a very historical engagement with Ethiopia, because Ethiopian troops fought in Korean War. They sent more than 6,000 troops. And then we had a very special diplomatic relations with Ethiopia. You wouldn't believe that how Koreans feel about Ethiopia and how Ethiopians feel about Korea.
That's
And,
interesting. I'm glad you said that.
Say another story, because there are so many Ethiopian civil servants and businessmen and even academics visit Korea. And then whenever we have a meeting, even Koreans visit Ethiopia, whenever we have a meeting, we start with, okay, thank you very much for your support of the Korean War. So they were saying that Koreans are real people because we really appreciate about what they did for us. Anyway, today's the material which I prepared here is I give lectures in many different places. I also work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Even the other day I had a long hour meeting with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because we are trying to capture how we can follow Africa, because there are so many countries trying to do something in Africa, and I will show you from the lecture. And it is not very academical, it is very, say, simple knowledge, information, data, which I'm going to show you. So, I'm not going to spend much time for just some kinds of indicators or figures. People do not believe that how large the African continent is, because if you see 30 million square kilometers, it means that 3 times larger than USA. And then from here to, from the far east to far west, it will be about 7 hours of flight, meaning that about 6,000 or between 5,500 or 6,000 kilometers. And then from north to south, very long. Why? Because I put it this way. I got it from Japanese scholar. He mentioned that he wrote a very small book saying that the size of Africa is the distance from Tokyo to Sydney. And the Tokyo to Sydney, it will take about 10 or nearly 11 hours. And then I explained that it will be from Seoul to Sydney. It will take about 12 hours. So from the top here, north to south, it will take about 11 more hours. Can you believe that? It's huge. Let me tell you some stories, because I was in Europe for 13 years, so I know how Europeans express about Africa. Ethiopia only, 1 million square kilometers. And it is a double size of France. France is about just over 500,000. And in Europe, they say France from east to west is 1,000 kilometers, north-south 1,000. Here, 1,600 kilometers. Can you believe that? It's huge. But actually, world map is rather biased, distorted. Because if you see the globe is not really spread. It's a bit larger along the equatorial line. So even DR Congo, Tanzania, Kenya, they are all very big countries. Even Tanzania, do you remember Serengeti National Park? The size of Serengeti is 1.5 times larger than Gyeonggi province. Can you believe that? So these are the size. And so if I say that, oh, but most of the continent is desert, no. Only over the area of USA is Sahara desert. And then other areas, incredible. You won't believe how rich it is. Because some years ago, I was flying from Istanbul to Cameroon, and then you can see that in this area, they have the second largest forest in the world after Amazon. It's like a second lung of a whole globe, generating a lot of oxygen. Incredible. And they have this size of big trees, and they are cutting down. Who are doing it? Chinese are taking. So I was staying in Yaoundé over the week or so, and during the midnight or after midnight, we couldn't sleep because it's so noisy. Why? Because they are carrying their huge timber. And it's very interesting because another extra information I can give you. I met some Canadian specialists who are working for forest, and he said, what are the good things in Africa? He said one word, single word. You know, in Canada, it takes about 80 years to harvest the timber, but here only 40 years, because everything grows very quick. Incredible. I can say so many other things. Anyway, so very diversified because the languages, 55 countries, resources very rich. Still, they don't know how much they have it. Still they are recovering. Even Kenya, they found oil. Ethiopia, they found natural gas. And Uganda also, there is Uganda here. And even, can you believe that Somalia, they found oil? Because they have been having, or they were being colonized for many years, and they didn't have an opportunity to explore. And you know that DR Congo, during the Second World War, they took uranium from here and they made the atom bomb for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, only a small portion of people are living in urban area and growing very rapidly. So some people ask, oh, what matters with the urbanization? Urbanization means that a lot of consumption, higher income, required a lot of investment. And historically, very sad, because in Britain, I was told that, yeah, when you see African continent, even my professor was telling me that, France was trying to colonize from from west to east in the horizontal, and the vertical Britain. That's a very rough expression about European colonialism. But apart from that, DR Congo was colonized by Belgium. Belgium is a small country, but big. And the Germans, quite a few, here, quite a few places. Even Portuguese, Spanish, and all imperial powers trying to get hold of African continent. And you know, Ethiopia was very, very unique because they were never colonized, except 4 years of rule during Second World War. And then we know that Somalia is having very serious problems internally and externally. Actually, Somalia was colonized by Italians, British, and French. And the French colony was independent as a Djibouti, and then Britain, Italy, they united, and then they were having problems. I have also so many other stories. And then Tanzania, many former German colonies were divided by or given to France and Britain after First World War. There are so, I will be very much interested in if I see how they negotiated, because like Tanzania was a German colony, but after First World War, when Germany was beaten, Britain took over. So Tanzania has a very unique history, having German system and British system.
If I could just say one odd thing, on the West Coast, Cameroon has a split English-French background.
That's right.
And it's one place where the minority in the
Yes.
mountains are English speakers, while the majority in the capital are French. So it's
Sure.
unlike
Exactly.
what people assume about English as a global language. There, it's the minority language.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of variety.
Yeah, I was there, and in Cameroon, actually I had some project about 10 years ago. In the southern part of Cameroon was British influence, and then all 80% of were all French. And the Paul Biya, the president, has been ruling the country more than 30 years, and they intentionally appoint a couple of ministers in the cabinet, but still they have a lot of internal problems. Anyway, so another, if I say another interesting story, Angola, and there is the map is not really clear here. Yeah, this one is Angola, and this one is DR Congo. This one is Cabinda, where Angola has a lot of oil reserves. So I was curious, how come there is a disconnect? And then DR Congo allowed Angola to have this one. And then I heard that there were, because Angola was a Portuguese colony, DR Congo was a Belgian colony. And they were always fighting each other along the border. And then Belgian king said, why we have so many problems with the Portuguese along the borderline? And then they said, oh, they want more land and more land. Then the Belgian king said, why don't you give them small patch of land, which is unnecessary, not cultivable, and just give them. And then they decided to give this very small patch of land where they have oil. Like Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
How pity it was for Russia to sell Alaska.
So those are dates of decolonization,
Oh,
basically?
yeah, correct. Yes, all
Yeah.
the dates are showing the date of.
So what occurred in, it looked like mainly in the 60s, what occurred in the 60s that that led to so much? So I can't see all the dates, but I know there was, you know, like the Atlantic Charter and things like that.
Historically, actually, until the end of the Second World War, they were all very safe under the colonial rule. But actually, first country independent from the colonialism was Ghana, 1957. And then other countries were asking, we want independent, we want independent. And then they gradually negotiated it, and then they allowed to have their own government. And most of African countries were independent in early part of the 1960s. And then a few of them were very late, like Zimbabwe, 1979. It was West Rhodesia, East Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, Zambia. Some countries were independent very late, because those colonies are so valuable. We didn't want to give them independence. That's why what happened.
And Portugal had a dictatorship until the 70s too that was overthrown rather peacefully too, which led, I bet,
Yes.
to
And then there are also many other things to talk about, because after independence, it was during the Cold War, many countries joined Russia So they became, well, they took over, well, they changed their political system to socialism. That's why when they were in Russian side, all the Western world didn't have much of business linkages or foreign aid. They were all trying to have some aid from Russia, but their quality of foreign aid were not that much useful for their own development.
So, to some extent, it was competition with Russia. That so instead of these countries going to Russia,
Yeah,
sort of
many
West opened-
Russians tried to influence, even Tanzania, Ethiopia, 1970s, Sudan, many countries tried to make allies with them. While Western European countries and the USA were just hesitating because they, even though they tried to support them to run the countries, but they are not really much things to do. And many of them. And only few were staying as it is as a democratic market-driven economy like Kenya and Ghana. Those two were best example. Others, all more or less all they extended. South Africa also, they didn't have a socialism, but other countries more or less they all had socialism for a number of years. And then after 1989, they all changed. Even for many years, North Koreans have more diplomatic relations than South Korea. Not now. Because even during that time, North Korea with China, backed up by Russia, they were having a lot of military engagement. Even Ethiopia, they built ammunition factory. Still they support. Do you know that North Koreans were trying to kidnap me in Ethiopia 1995. I was on the television, newspaper, and then they searched because my mother was alone in countryside, and then Korean CIA came, police came, but my brother was a military pilot. So in terms of say, what do you call it, the personal identity, it was no problem. So if you type it, then you can read it somewhere. Even it is in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, one say conflict between.
So you're like James Bond.
And it is a long story. Very interesting continent, and then I do not want to go in detail, but they have plenty of natural resources, oil, gas. Apart from that, a lot of possibilities for renewable energy. Incredible. You know, when they were independent in early 1960s, many countries was called the continent of future, continent of hope, but it was 1976, even they said continent of the future. And you can see there's some articles here and there. But sometimes when they were not able to grow and then having all kinds of economic hardship, political hardship, they say continent of despair. I didn't put that things. Even just a few, about 2 weeks ago, there was a heading called The New Scramble for Africa. And this one was 2013. So as time goes on, every couple of years or 5 years, they issue special on Africa. It's a very hopeful continent, they say. And now, if you read this one, I just brought some key points. And then it is a third surge in Africa because there is a big increase in diplomatic relations. Can you believe that we did 6 years, 320 embassies were established in Africa. And Turkey, 26 last year. And India, 18. Korea has only 20. And the military ties you can have. So, if you see now, we have a Korea-Africa Forum in Korea. Japan has it. Japan started the first among the Asian countries. China has it, and India has it, and Turkey has it, Brazil has it, and then many big economies, of course, Europeans and Americans, they started very early in terms of summit meetings. So China has been very active. When they have say summit meetings with Africans, sometimes they have more than 40, 45 head of states visiting Beijing because they all want some aid. But Korea, I attended several meetings, I still do. And then we have only 1 or 2 head of states and then maybe 40, 50 ministers. We all finance them. But China is different. USA, oh, please to come to Washington, D.C., we are going to have some meeting. And sometimes 40 over. In Europe, about 20, 30. I was Paris a few years ago when they had the Euro-Africa Summit. And they had 20, 30. 20, less than 30. But Korea is still weak. Japan, sometimes they have it in Tokyo and sometimes in Africa. So a few years ago, they had it in Kenya, and then they were able to invite about 15 head of states. So Africa is changing. Why? Because their economy has been improving very rapidly. So in terms of share, still very minimum, only 3%. So in terms of share of total world GDP and then export or trade, export, more or less 3%, very small. Even in Korea, we have a trade with the African countries, and the share is only 1.67%, very minimal, not much. But China is quite a lot. China is dominating. And also, it is not only economic improvement, but political changes as well. So previously, there are only few countries in Africa who didn't have military coup. I remember that I read it, only Senegal and Senegal and Tanzania. Only 2 countries didn't have a military coup. Apart from that, they all had military coups. Even Madagascar some years ago, radio man took power just to bring in 150 soldiers. So there are so many political upheavals. And nowadays it has changed. Why? Previously, African Union or economic blocs were not really doing much whenever they had, let's say, military coups. But now, because they know that if they can block the economy, then they cannot sustain, they cannot run the country. So one good example was in Bali, 2012. Within 1 week, if you do not step down, we are going to block we are going to bring economic sanctions, 100%. How are you going to do? So he said, okay, within 3 months, we are going to have a democratic election. And then end of April, they had the democratic election, and then the military coup leader stepped down. This is what happened. And then also some other countries. But some countries are still struggling, like Sudan, South Sudan especially, and the DR Congo. They had an election a few months ago. Now they have a new president. And the economic progress I mentioned. And if you see Also social improvement, meaning that education, healthcare, many things have been improved. International relations also. And the African Union become much more solid compared to say 10, 20 years ago. And it's very interesting how come they can run the African Union without American and British, European support. They cannot run. The African Union headquarters is in Ethiopia, built by Chinese, 200 million project, very big building. And the Chinese told me that when they completed the building, please help us, we do not have operating cost. So every year they ask the Chinese government $6 million US. So it is very difficult to run. Like a UN, we know that all member states contribute a certain amount of money. Even like European Union, they have all the contribution by the member states. But here, all the countries, most of them have a shortage of governmental budget. How they can contribute? So they have to beg. This is the problem. Just showing some figures. During the last 10 over years, 6 or 7 out of 10 top performing economies are all African economies. And since 2003, overall growth rate among the African countries exceeded the Asian countries. This is what is happening. So we know that economy is like a bicycle. Once you are riding on bicycle, and then there will be some kinds of a continuation. And then you can see that also foreign direct investment. There are a lot of inflow of foreign other currencies. Maybe the most desirable thing will be foreign direct investment, FDI. And the total amount of FDI ups and downs, but still in upward trend. And then another way, portfolio investment, indirect investment, but some ups and downs. Sometimes they have even negative.
Can you just,
Africans?
sorry for interrupting. Can you describe? I can't read the green and yellow and orange.
Yeah, this one, brown is 48.
Okay.
And then yellow is remittance by diaspora. All different countries from USA, Europe, they remit money to their own home countries. Portfolio investment is indirect cash investment, like a stock market or whatever, or financial market. Foreign direct investment is building factories. And you can see that it has been improved a lot. Now, I didn't get a recent figure, so I just used the old one.
Okay.
So you can see that there will be upward trend and increasing opportunities. Nowadays, incredible, even faster. This one is a growth, export growth. I mentioned briefly. You can see that how quickly they are improving. And I will tell you a little bit more about African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Started last year. They gathered in Rwanda, Kigali, and then during that time, 44 countries signed, and they need to have a ratification from their own countries. Until few days ago, until 4th of April, 22 countries ratified, but they, 7 of them still haven't submitted the documents yet, because I got very updated information, because Megan asked me some information about what is going on with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And then they also asked me, what are the first steps? Actually, if you see African countries, their economy is more or less agricultural based. So it will be very difficult for them to have a inter-regional trade. Like internal regional trade, in European Union, nearly 75–80%. of total of their trades are all with the neighboring countries. But here, less than 15%. Asian countries, about 60%. So they want improve intra-regional trade up to 50% within 10 years, which I doubt about it. Many people ask me, what do you think about it? You know, if you want to have intra-regional trade, you have to have some industrial capacity. But unfortunately here, more or less, they are producing similar goods. Like one example, what is the example? One example is cocoa. Cocoa, number one producer is Cote d'Ivoire, number two Ghana. And they cannot exchange, isn't it? And then there are so many other reasons. And then when you see economics, you have to see what kinds of countries are doing well and how much. Because fortunately, they classify oil importers, the countries, those who haven't done much of natural resources, like Ethiopia, Rwanda, and some countries do not have natural resources, but their economic growth rate is still high. This one. And then oil exporters are not only oil, but also those who have a lot of natural resources, and they have been having ups and downs. Meaning that without natural resources, African countries still can grow. Like Ethiopia, you cannot believe that how much they are investing, how many foreign companies are just coming in. And then foreign direct investment in the portfolio also increased a lot since the year 2000. And also when you see political system, they have been improved a lot. Democracy, sometimes we want to have a developmental state. Even I had a big discussion with the Ethiopian civil servant in January and end of February. And they wanted to have a developmental state, which Korea did it, and Japan did it many years ago, and China did it, Singapore, Taiwan, all. And Africa, we don't know. There is no single answer. There are so many issues they need to discuss about, because there are so many rulers, or president or prime minister, staying in the power for many, many decades. Still there are some. And I always argue that it should be better to give good opportunities to everybody. Because if you have a developmental state and then austerity government, then only few people will have opportunities to grow or promote. And I found that if you are a political leader in, say, country like Ethiopia with 100 million, they study a lot, so they have a lot of knowledge, and they try to implement Western system or Korean system or Chinese system in the best way. They also know how they can share and then look after those people who are in need. Briefly, even some books say, even some magazines titles say that lions on the move. They say lion, Africa is lion. And you can see that how they are going to improve. Actually, the growth rate in Africa has been even faster than what they expected, and even they will exceed more. I always tell them, why don't you put like 6 or 7% economic growth rate? Why don't you put it like 9% or 11, 12%? And they are rather conservative or a bit cautious about having very high economic growth rate targets, like what China and Korea did, but they are not that conservative. But you know, I always tell them, maybe when you make a say target, why don't you target which could be a bit difficult to touch, and then you squeeze them. And you can see the number of people. They have about 1.2 billion population, and they will soon take over India and China within 10 years. They will talk about Chinese population. So if you have I mentioned about 12 billion, 1.2 billion. So if you have a 2% population growth per year, it will be 24 million per year. Can you believe that?
And they're also, I've heard,
Yes.
the youngest continent
Yes.
in the world
Yeah,
too.
yeah. I don't have it here. Yeah, about 60% of the population is below 30. Anyway, so if you have that kinds of a very high population growth rate, it will be big burden for the society. Even many years, about 10 years ago, I was having meeting with cabinet ministers in the Ethiopian government. And then one gentleman said, oh, we have, so I asked, your population growth rate is still 2.67 something. And then every year you have more than 2 million newborn babies. How are you going to manage job creation 18, 20 years later? Now they have 2 million new job seekers every year. So you have to have some family planning, which they don't listen. Traditionally, regionally, with religion, they do not care. But they are happy. It's a pity, because even in USA, it will be very difficult to create 2 million jobs. In Ethiopia, it is a really serious problem of, because young graduate even, because they have 44 universities now. Many of them graduated from university, no job, just walking in the street. That's why they have a lot of demonstration, political struggle during the last 2 years.
That's in Ethiopia. There's 44 universities.
Yes.
Are they all in Addis Ababa, or are they scattered around the country?
All of it's scattered around the country. When I was there was only one university, Addis Ababa University, during Mengistu regime, and one college in the rural area.
It's a very large
very
change.
silly.
Very large change.
And some people, shall I tell you one story? Because I arrived there 1st of April 1994, and then within 2-3 days, the president of the university asked me, why don't you give a public lecture? So 400 students were in the one big lecture theater. And then I explained them about Korean economic development. Even during that time, we didn't have a PPT, can you believe that? And I was using overhead, and then I wrote down by hands, and then showing a couple of keywords, and then I was explaining. And then can you believe that during that time, 65 million Ethiopians, top of tops, entered the university. And then after 1.5 hours lecture or so, one guy raised the hands, and then, oh, Professor Lee, we don't need the Korean, we don't need the UN, we don't need the USA, we don't need the Europeans. We can build up our country by ourselves. And then there were many, many professors sitting in the front row, and 400 students, 4th-year students in that university. Why? Because they did their first year studies when Mengistu was there. So they even, I was shocked when I went to the library, they didn't have any economic text, but they had many, many capital, the capital, the Karl Marx book.
Mm.
And then I said, do you remember, my answer was quite agreed by many people. Your income level is, during that time, $110 US. USA was 37,000 US dollars or something during that time. So if you become good friends with you are earning 110, and then Americans earning 37,000 US dollars. If you become good friends, do you think the Americans will get more benefit than you, or you will get more benefit from Americans? No more answer, no more question. So why don't you? And then I also explained that when you get very good relationship with other developed countries, you can get a lot of technology very easy, rather than developing technology by yourself. It will take ages. Anyway, so many problems here and there mentioned about urbanization, but some possibilities. And it was just the turn of the century when Africans gathered together and they tried to build up by themselves, led by Gaddafi. Gaddafi said, I'm going to finance when we build African Union like European Union. And then we can build United States of Africa. And like in Europe, their final goal is United States of Europe. But nothing happened. And then, because they didn't want to have a lot of dependency with the former colonial power or influenced by Americans or Russians, they believed that they could stand by themselves, and then they tried many programs. One program is a new partnership for Africa's development. Okay, we can develop our continent by ourselves. And then there are some stories. Some improvement, because they know that how other countries are doing, and then they disseminated their knowledge and the experience, and then other countries can benchmark. That is what is happening. And they also have many other programs. And because, as I said, African continent is so huge, they sometimes divide in regions. International institutions, they have 5 different regions: north, south, east, west, and central. But they have some regional specifications, if I say. Like some regions, East Africa or South Africa, they have their own regional blocks, many regional blocks. And many things are overlapping. But if you want these economic blocks or economic integration very effective, then you should establish good institution, which requires a lot of money, which they do not have enough money to contribute. That's why, even though they have looks very nice, but not effective. Even they have some nation level interest. I was also talked, because sometimes I visit African Union and then trade division head, and then we discuss about economic integration. Because I was teaching economic integration in Korea University for 6 years, so I have some theoretical background. And then I said, if we want to integrate, then there should be some benefits from integration. If you do not, then there is no way of pursuing much closer economic integration. Unfortunately, very unfortunate, because they do not have capacity to do that. Because many countries get government revenue from import duties. So if they do not have import duties from neighboring countries trading, then they have a shortage of government duties. I talked in my class, some years ago I was in Yaoundé, Hilton Hotel. One night, $400 US. So expensive. And the hotel was very old. And then, can you believe that? I had to stay for 1 week. There was no water. It was disgusting. Can you believe no water? And then we asked. And then they said, oh, because the water company, state-owned enterprise, water company didn't pay salary for a couple of months. So they had on strike and they closed all the water. And anyway, there's one, meaning that many countries are having shortage of the government budget. And this one I mentioned earlier about African continent free trade area. Actually, according to the agreement, as long as 22 countries ratify it, they are going to start. So it is very likely they could start in July. Or another news saying that they may start in January. But Megan said, no, they are going to start in July. But I saw one newspaper article saying that July, but their homepage I read that they will start from January 2020. And the big thing is when you have these kinds of big free trade area, there should be some countries who are going to lead them, like in European Union, Germany, France, Italy, Britain. Those 4 key member states are leading the European Union. But others, they're just following. But here, Nigeria is supposed to be leader, but they are not joining even now. Still, they signed it, but they are going to sign it, but we don't know when they are going to, because they have a different opinion from the cabinet, saying that if we join it, we'll lose a lot. Why do we have to join? We are big country, the biggest country in African continent. We have plenty of industrial capacity. Why do we have to do it? So, big problem for future. And then they need a partner. Why? Because they have plenty of factor endowment, including human resources, and then they need to develop a lot of capacity, a lot of possibilities, but they are not good at utilizing. So they need to have a good partner, even governance, social development, even rural development, service sector, so many things we can work together. And they even partnership in agriculture, industrial area, and there are some resource-rich countries and the resource-poor countries. And they all have some possibilities. I don't want to go in detail. And then I always tell them, we have to approach it with different strategies toward those countries who have a lot of natural resources, those who haven't got. And then we are doing it. Like a textile in Ethiopia, one company, they employ 4,300 people. I never seen one factory having 4,000 people working in one huge floor. I saw it. And then unfortunately, their productivity is quite low. Not comparable to Asians. That's why they are losing money. Even Yongwon means that Yongwon Trading, the biggest Korean textile company. He visited in our campus a couple of times. He has his own jet. He has a big factory in Bangladesh, Indonesia.
Where do they get their cotton? Is it an internal agreement with other African countries to give Ethiopia cotton, or they buy it on the world system? Or?
That's a good question. Why? Because they have a low cotton in Ethiopia. Because I said Ethiopia is a huge country, but quality of cotton was just really bad. So they import, Sudan, Tanzania, even Egypt, they grow low cotton. Even they import from Turkey. Very silly, because they have hand-picking system. So people, because their wage rate is so low in a rural area, there are so many people living, and they use labor, peasant farmers, and they pick it, and they do not really care about the quality. So I visited textile company, cotton yarn. There will be some process. You have to have a ginning machine, and then you have to throw the very fine cotton thread, and then the cotton threads will go to the weaving machine. But when they use Ethiopian low cotton, it will make a lot of faults to the system, because I saw the machine, because I was very much interested in it. They were using the most advanced state-of-art technology in terms of textile industry. And these machines are all Japanese and then from Switch. And then I asked them, is there any Korean machine? They said, Korean machineries are not good enough. but it's very sensitive, very fine, good machine, which they cannot have enough supply of low cotton, they have to import. And do you know that in Ethiopia, when they try to import for cotton, textile garment, or any other industries, it takes ages. So they operate for 3 weeks, and then 3 weeks they have idle. It is really terrible. Anyway, so young one, the chairperson, promised that he is going to invest about 100 million US dollars in Ethiopia. And then they have a test bed, employing about 600 people now in Ethiopia. But they are still hesitating, right? Because the productivity is still low. And then discipline. They work for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they got salary, and they do not come to the factory. And then they built huge industrial zone in Awasa, about 500 kilometers down south from Addis Ababa. I went there in November last year. And then they said it is the largest textile and garment industrial zone in African continent. Everything is very modern. And then there are quite a few Chinese companies and Turkish companies, Indian companies, and then American companies too. And then American companies, they employed 1,000 people at once. So they gathered all the people. And then I heard that 1 month later, 500 of them left. They trained it, and they were working for textile. One after salary, they didn't appear in the factory. So what should I do? They were saying. Anyway, so there are some others. I do not want to say negative things too much, but also there are so many behind the stories. But opportunities are there, but it is not really convincing. But there are so many other things, like SOCs. Huge. You won't believe that how much they are investing. Incredible amount. Even Ethiopia is building the largest hydro dam in Ethiopia, second, just after Aswan Dam. And then when delegation came to Korea with a few cabinet ministers a few years ago, and then I accompanied them to Soyang multipurpose dam in Chuncheon area. And then they looked at it, oh, our dam is 3 times larger than this. They said, oh, when we built this one in 1970s, this dam was the biggest in Asia. Do you know that? Oh, don't worry, we are building 3 times larger than this. But they're supposed to be finishing about a year ago, but still they are under construction. Maybe it need 3 more years, something, because they do not have enough fund and raising here and there. And then you won't believe that the possibilities of a road building, railway, seaport, and incredible. You know, actually Korean government is supporting many African countries to build a seaport. Because in Tanzania, the main seaport in Tanzania is Dar es Salaam. And you can see that many ships, big cargo ships are waiting outside in the offshore because the seaport is congested. And we are trying to solve it. The Chinese are doing it, but sometimes Africans are hesitating Chinese engagement because they are trying to take over everything. Do you know that in South Africa, 500,000 Chinese? Ethiopia, some years ago, the minister said, oh, I said, how many Chinese are living in Ethiopia? They said, oh, maybe less than 200,000. Now more than 300,000. And they marry Ethiopian girls, ladies, and then they buy real estate and land. Land is public ownership, so they rent. Chinese are everywhere, even Angola, 500,000, incredible. Kenya, Tanzania, everywhere because they offer huge size of project, bring tens of thousands Chinese. When they finish their project, please do not come to China. You just stay there. Many Chinese are marrying Africans. Investment to factories, like a shoe factory in Ethiopia. It is brilliant. One Chinese lady studied in Britain law, and then she was working in Swiss. And then I don't know how she was able to come to Ethiopia, and then she opened a shoe factory, women's shoe factory. Became billionaire now, employing more than 4,000 people. She was on the World Economic Forum. Good speaker too, incredible. And then all her product goes to Ivanka's company. They buy everything. Because our, they do not have to pay import duties. And there are so many other studies. And then energy, the possibilities are incredible. Fossil fuel may be less desirable, but hydropower, Nile River, the longest river in the world, and plenty of water. And then Congo River, if they can build a dam along the Congo River, they can cover whole continent, and still they can export to Europe. And also renewable energy. Many years ago, Siemens had a feasibility study building solar power generation in Sahara Desert. If they can build, I read it somewhere, the area which could be equivalent to Belgium, they can supply all electricity power to African countries and then export to Europe. And then geothermal. Kenya is the #1 country in the world in terms of geothermal, and the Korean company built a geothermal power generation, power plant. And then a few years ago, I was sitting with a Japanese engineer. I was on the way to Ethiopia, he was on the way, and then we challenged it in Dubai. And then we were talking. And then he said, oh, why are you going to Ethiopia? And then he said, he's an advisor, he's advising Ethiopian Ministry of Industry and Power Generation. And then, oh, you are doing a lot of work for Africa? And then he said, and then my previous job was for Kenya. And what did you do? And then I advised the geothermal power plant. Oh, I heard that Korean company is building. Yes, they are building the power plant, but they are using Toshiba turbine. So maybe you know very well. So it means that core technology comes from Japanese. Yeah. So I said, yes, of course, yeah, Japanese technology is advanced than Korean technology. It doesn't mean that, he said. Anyway, so plenty of opportunities and renewable. Even Ethiopia, we call it 13 months of sunshine. Why? Because they have sunny days more than anywhere else. Huge. So potential is there. And wind power too. Because from north to south, they have more than 3,000 kilometers of, we call it Rift Valley, like a Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon is a small scale compared to Africans, but they didn't develop. Huge, about 500 meters deep, you can see that. Even in Ethiopia, Kenya, Ethiopia, Zambia, Tanzania, Zambia, all. Along that Rift Valley, out of the wind power, geothermal, incredible. Service sector, so many. Almost everything. What we do, we can.
Seems like
Yes.
Africa is a natural for satellite technology.
Hmm.
Indonesia put up the Palapa satellites in the 1970s and 80s and used it to develop their oil fields and
Yes.
so. But it also seems like there's probably a number of problems because there's so many different countries and so many different languages and stuff. So I know ArabSat is kind of big in the northern part of Africa,
Yes,
but do you know of any other major satellite projects?
yes, in Nigeria.
Nigeria?
Yeah, but their technology level is limited. Even I talked to Nigerian delegation some years ago. Is it not silly because you have been producing oil since 1976 and then you are still dependent upon oil major from outside? And they have their own companies, but their engineers do not have the skills which others have. And even I visited Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, and then I met from the plane. I met one Russian engineer. Very interesting because on the way to during that time Ghana, we stopped over Lagos, and then from Lagos to Istanbul, and the Russian big man. And then I asked him, "What do you do there?" "I am an oil engineer, working for Nigerian company." And then every 8 weeks he's having holiday, getting huge salary. And then I was wondering, I talked to a Nigerian delegation, how come you haven't been producing this oil since 1976 and you are still dependent upon foreign engineers and experts? Isn't that right? Yeah. And he said, "Oh, we tried, but everybody, they work a couple of years and it is a very hard job and they leave." So, dedication, commitment, very low. But it is not only that, even some other areas, even energy sector. Akasombo Dam was built by Americans and the British in Ghana. That dam was one of the biggest in Africa during the 1960s. And then they promised that a larger portion of electricity will be given to Ghanaian public as well as the neighboring countries. And then about 50%, I can't remember exact percentage, but 50% for aluminum refinery plant, which they are still going on. You can easily find it from Google. And all key engineers are also foreigners. I talked to Ghanaians. "Oh, you have, I don't know now, maybe better. Even we trained Ghanaian engineers, electricity engineers. And then they said, "Oh yeah, because we trained and we have a department in universities, but when they work, they found it is very hard work, so they leave." So in their case, they couldn't, say, train or promote those industries. So lack of dedication. Let me go through what Korean partnership can be done. About 30% of Korean ODA goes to Africa. Now it will increase more. Why? Because many Asian countries, they succeeded a lot in terms of economic development, and we are reducing the proportion to Asian countries for Korean ODA. And number one recipient is Tanzania. Tanzania in terms of EDCF, in terms of concessional loans. And the grant, Ethiopia is number one. And then I am showing here where Korean ODA budgets are being spent. Economic reform, economic related project are the last one. And then education, health, and then other social things. So many Korean ODA project and the programs are very much geared into economic related issues, including KSP, knowledge sharing program, and some infrastructure development, even training programs, and then education sector. Because many African countries are very much interested in how Korea made it. And then my first answer is because of human resource development. And then how did you educate the people? Even in this university, I invited about 10 high-level civil servants from Ministry of Education in Ethiopia a few years ago, and then while they were here for 10 days or so, we talked a lot, and then they were very much interested in primary, secondary education system, which we are supporting them a lot, even STEM, because they have regulations of 70-30. 70% of department or number of students should be engineering and science, and 30% social science and humanities in Ethiopia. And many countries are also following suit. And then those who are joining engineering and science, their mathematics and physics levels are so low. Even we have been supporting one university in Ethiopia called Adama Science Technology University. The president was Korean, now Ethiopian. And then the first year students didn't know the length of 10 centimeters, because the professor said from the one experimental class, why don't you bring about 10 centimeter long bars? They said, I cannot. Why? Because I don't have a ruler. Oh, I'm saying around 10 centimeters. How much it will be? This much or this much? So why? Because they didn't have any educational instrument when they were in school. So big problem. And then you can see the trend. And then we try to find Korean model for ODA, but we didn't really find any. But we are doing very similar to what Japanese are doing and British and the other countries are doing. And now we are quite keen on sharing our economic development experience. And then many countries are asking institutional development, like KIST or KIST or Research Institute, or even training education institutions, even especially Tibet. Because even myself, I have been saying so many times to African policymakers, you need to train the people so they can get skills. When you have other skills, and then foreign direct investment can be attracted. So as Korea did in 1960s and 70s. And then I said, I was a mechanic, I was an engineer. And then I told them, Germany did a lot in Korea, but we want to do it in your country. And then when you have a skill, you will do something. So that's why Korean government decided to support technical vocational education and training, Tibet, 10 million each. And then we made it very successful between 2011 and 2016. This project is one of the most successful projects in Korea in terms of ODA. Apart from building big size of schools or universities. And then now we are doing for another 5 countries, because during first 5 years in the 2010, we covered the southern part of Africa for 5 countries, like Ethiopian, Botswana, Malawi, Namibia, Zambia. And then now we are doing it for Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, and Madagascar. I was part of a member. I was hired by UNESCO to participate in this program. Because they found that just training the people is not only that it is not only that simple, because they should be matched or aligned with their own economic development plan. You know, just 1.5 years ago, Ethiopian government suddenly started the so-called integrated agro-processing industrial zone. They got a lot of money from World Bank. Oh, we needed to have agro-processing industries. World Bank, so how much do we need? Oh, we need about $100 million US. Okay, you can build 5 industrial zones for agricultural sector. Very, very silly. Why? Because they didn't have engineers. And then I visited there. Oh, you are going to start integrated agro-processing industrial zone this year. It was last year. This year, and then you are bringing all the machineries, and then who are going to run the machines in the factories? Oh, we are going to train now. Can you help us? This is already too late. That is gap which they have some problems, and it was really frustrating. They spent already a lot of money, and they brought the machineries here and there, and they are idling. So they have mismanagement. Now, just want to spend 5 minutes. How we can build up capacity? Korea alone is not enough. So we have to work together with the World Bank. Or we have a lot of money under the name of Korea Trust Fund. World Bank, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, we all have money. And whenever we have annual meetings, we always promise that, okay, we are going to support $5 billion US. Even a few years ago, they had during Park Geun-hye's administration, we promised $5 billion US to Africa. It is signed. It was signed, and we had only few projects from that. So we needed to utilize it. And the 70 countries in Myanmar, and then ICT for development, quite a top agenda, and Green Growth Trust Fund. During Lee Myung-bak's administration, they prepared it, and they already committed to sign it, and then we still have some plenty of fund here and there. Knowledge sharing program, HLD. So we can easily find that how much we have been spending on where, in which country. These are all from the home pages. And the Semal Undong village, current government was hesitating to use it, but some president from Asia and Africa said, oh, we got a lot of benefit from Semal Undong, and why don't you use it? Because immediately after new administration last year, 2 years ago, Koika and then other offices said, don't use Semal Undong. Now they are using it. So there's a inconsistency of Korean policy. Now they try, and many other things. Seaport plan, private sector, energy, transportation, and sometimes we have co-financing. What else? UNDP is also a good place. UNDP, I worked with UNDP last year, and they have a good ideas, but problem is they do not have money. So when they have good ideas, and then they try to provide some kinds of a project, and the project could be financed by World Bank or African Development Bank. That is what they do. I propose that in Tanzania to establish a so-called Korea-Tanzania Technology Cooperation Center. In fact, I did some work for Tanzania, and then I applied for a project to National Research Foundation, and then Seoul National University also applied. And then, because I did it already a few years ago for the preliminary study, and the Seoul National University came a little bit late, and then National Research Foundation asked me, why don't you have a collaboration? But the characters of the project were very different because they were using solar panel for energy in Arusha area. But my project was we should be working in Dar es Salaam. And then we couldn't feel it. And then one of my friends from Seoul National University has been running the program. And then I proposed this idea to UNDP, and they said, if I find about $700,000 then we can start. But still they didn't find fund. So there are some mechanisms which we can make use of it. And the UNESCO too. UNESCO, Korean government sometimes give 10 million like that. and then now that we are doing it. Even IFAD, International Food and Agricultural Organization, Food Agricultural Organization, IFAD and Agricultural Development. These are all in Italy. I have some friends there, and then they have a lot of fund too, because Korean government is very keen on working with the international organizations. And also other institutions, AIIB, Gayan and myself, we visited there, European Union, OECD, and then other. Actually, whenever I visit foreign developing countries, I sometimes meet people from USAID, JICA, GIG, Germany, DFID, Britain, Canadians, Sweden, and Australia. And then I'm always happy to discuss with them. Unlikely in Korea. In Korea, when you see all those people working for ODA or International Development Corporation, they sometimes do a couple of years here and then a couple of years another place, and they are not just stationing or focusing on certain area. But there, like I see that I met one gentleman from Canada. He has been working for Ethiopia 20 years left. In Germany also, one lady in charge of Tibet more than 20 years. So they spend all their life in one specific country and then move another place. So they are very much focused, and they have a very deep insightful knowledge. And I always try to get information. So these kinds of projects is not simple. If you do not know society well, this project cannot be succeeded. So we have to have a very deep, very accurate, precise information and the data so that the project can be successful. And it will take time for Korea, so it is better to work with those people. That's my idea. And then COICA, EDCF, they all agree with, and they are quite keen on supporting those kinds of activities. Even nowadays, many projects were given by World Bank directly to Korean institutions, and they just follow what World Bank or AFDB are managing. And nowadays, many Koreans are engaged in these kinds of activities, and then once they finish it, sometimes they join World Bank or African Development. A few years or 5 years ago, there were only 1 or 2 regular staff in African Development Bank. Now 15. So many Koreans are just having this different type of experience and join them. UNDP also. It's not very academic, not technical, just giving you some brief ideas about Africa and then how they are doing, and then how Korea has been doing very simply, and then how we can approach the project.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Lee. Would you like to take some
Any questions?
questions? Yeah.
Any questions? Thank you. Professor, any?
Well, I know somebody who's in Tanzania now. He's invited me to come visit. I guess I'll do that maybe early next year. Tanzania, Serengeti. Weather is like California. It's so nice.
Yes, yes.
Our Dr. Susanna Brown is going to Tanzania on a conference within a month or 2.
Is that right?
Yeah. Paid for by the ITC, CCCP, whatever. How many C's they add to that, I don't know. But by those grants that we have from the Korean government.
Now, if you said they need now institutions to train, technical people, so there will be opportunities for Koreans or even.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah.
Actually, Korean government is preparing many things for Africa now, and Africans, if they try to train by themselves, it will take ages to utilize it. And then Korea has knowledge, and then we have experience, and if we can work together, then there will be some synergy effect. That's what they are pursuing. And nowadays, this year, the Korean government budget for ODA is about 3.2 billion US dollars. A very small amount compared to USA, but still we are increasing every year. So part of policy could be related to how Korean industries can move into African continent to how they can create jobs for Korean young people. But I heard that many Korean young people are hesitating to go to Africa rather than they go to Japan because they want to live in a nice place.
They don't want to do hard work here, so why would they go?
What's interesting, you mentioned this tiny demographic of very dedicated, maybe even ideologically motivated people that want to help developing countries. Like you mentioned the Canadian who was there 20 years, the German, but that's a small demographic. So finding some ways, I guess, it was striking. I was thinking in terms, I studied comparative textiles development a long time ago. So your comments about success and challenges of Ethiopia textiles are interesting. We could chat later about that, but just it's fascinating the difficulty of putting all the pieces together. A lot of people think it's just provide the technology, it happens, but you describe the culture, the organization, the capacity of market knowledge of the world, all of these things have to come together, and that is a difficult challenge for a lot of landlocked countries, particularly in Africa, or countries that don't necessarily want to change their tax base to encourage, like you said, the flow of raw materials between countries because that would reduce their import taxes that their governments depend. So it's really tightly connected to each other, all these different issues of policy of government taxes and infrastructure between countries, the historical desire of Ethiopia, as you said, to be more autonomous, sort of like the North Korean Juche sort of structure, right? It was the historic, they would separate themselves from the world system in North Korea or Ethiopia historically. But recently with China, with Korea, Japan, opening themselves to a different, more globalized development structure. So that's fascinating. That I want just one small comment. When was this origin year of the example you gave? You said that engineers in Addis Ababa University in the 1990s didn't have access to slide rule or centimeter measurements, and they were
just 5 years ago.
Just 5 years ago. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That is a big challenge to get basic knowledge. My interest in mobile development using mobile networks, I wonder, mobile delivery of basic technical knowledge those are the kind of non-interpretive kind of knowledge bases that may translate well into a web service or quiz-based certifications of basic technical knowledge that may be useful. And it seems you've got a lot of money hanging around that they're afraid to even devote to it because they realize the challenges. So I would like to chat with you later. Maybe we have some time. What would be your opinion of ICT 4D development strategies to bring different countries up to speed on basic technical knowledges that don't really do graduate level work. They just need the basics, and if they don't get that, and if their teachers don't stay around very long, you said, maybe an infrastructure using mobile development could help bring up the tenor of levels of technical knowledge at least.
Talking about mobile technology, because I would think that because the infrastructure is not developed, so maybe they leapfrog all the, for example, phone lines, they just go to wireless.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So they could bring in actually the real high-tech technology.
Sure.
And is there an opportunity for Korean industry?
Oh, yes and no. Yes and no. Yes and no. Actually, many Korean companies tried to do so, but has been successful. But actually, one example is like in Kenya. Kenya use mobile banking the highest ratio in the world. Yes, everybody is using. And the amount which they are raising is so huge in terms of the company. And even they use it for microcredit and remittance and so many activities. And the Korean companies try to do other countries, but there are so many regulations.
Right.
Which,
I mean, particularly in South Africa, I mean, has a far more stable formal banking sector. And some of my students did a country report last semester on South Africa, and they found the uptake of South Africa was very low on mobile banking, ironically, and the culture still prefers ATMs and physically. Well, why? Because they sold gold and diamonds to the world for 150 years. I mean, so basically they've got a very established formal banking sector that handles money well, and the culture still prefers that, it seems, even though, as you said, like 1.2, 1.3 billion people by 2019 right now. According to some data I've seen, there's over 1.1 billion mobile phones, not smartphones, but mobile phones. So there is a huge network value that's waiting to be employed for so many different services beyond just telecommunications, I think. Yeah. But I don't want to monopolize the question. Anybody else, please? Explain yourself, how to treat it.
Yes?
Well, I'm interested in studying a master's program anywhere else. So it was my first time to actually have a consultation with Dr. Minch's office, and she recommended me to
perfect.
attend one of the,
Good.
there's a lecture happening, so that's why I'm here, and
Well,
thank you very much.
Well,
for
good. I'm glad Minji
staying.
Khan, you said, told you.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, okay, yeah.
It was very interesting, and thank you very much for your
It's a very limited knowledge and information.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Lee. This is the end of our time, and thanks for everyone for coming.
All right.
Yeah.
It was really good. Real experience. He's got real